I'd like to talk a little bit in a relatively short video about the strategy of planting trees and shrubs, high-value trees and shrubs for us, in contexts that are pretty darn feral and wild, allowing it to be that way in the spirit of making it complex and hidden enough that the deer would not know that there are hazelnuts and American persimmons in here. You may not know either, but let me point them out to you. They've gotten nearly no support from me. This is the first time I'm mowing through just to see how they're doing. They're doing great. No protection, no watering, and no deer browse. When we think of an orchard or tree and shrub, fruit, nut plantings, we normally think of nice open areas, nice generous space between plants, tightly mowed in general. That's the look that is kind of baked into most people's images of what this can look like. And that is all well and good, but when you've got a row of apple, apple, apple in a big open mowed field, you can absolutely expect full-on deer browse. Now in here, I didn't have the time and energy to commit much beyond getting plants in the ground. And so last year I had some extra, let me point them out to you, American persimmon, hazelnut, American persimmon, more hazel, persimmon, and hazel. Little pattern here of hazels to the south, persimmons to the north, another persimmon. So the persimmons can become full-size trees, the hazels can lean out to the sun to the south. You can call it lazy, you can also call it strategic, in that I knew if I planted these shrubs in here and I allowed the multiflora rows to re-sprout, all the herbaceous, rough, chunky herbaceous stuff. Last year I saw, when I was planting these in, the small florets of a burdock, which now have exploded into this spiky, crazy mess. This is a tough scenario for deer to move through burdock, get all these burrs attached to them, and they can't really even see that anything's in here. These plants have had almost zero browse from deer, and in a drought summer, there was competition for light and water, but all of this stacked layer of vegetation very much helped preserve water in this landscape. These shrubs actually look just fine for getting a near historic drought again. No management, no protection, and clearly no weed suppression. They're all here, and by next year they should be taller than me. Now, what I'm not trying to do in this video is to make the argument that the only way to plant shrubs and trees is in this completely wild, feral, gnarly, spiky jungle context. It's not necessarily best practice, but the important thing I want to share here is that if you plant trees and shrubs and the weeds get away from you, so to speak, there might be some real value in watching how the plants respond. Do they get browsed? Do they do okay? If they are not under stress and they're growing okay, maybe a little bit slower because of that competition, they may very well be able to get beyond rabbit, deer, and other herbivores because they're hidden in a chaotic mess. And you can call it a mess, or you can just call it rich, complex, interconnected diversity. I guess mess is quicker, so let's just call it a mess. But you can see that pattern was played out a number of times over and over again. American persimmon, this was one put in maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I never really did much weeding around it. I let the spiky stuff grow. In fact, I added a tayberry and some blackberries around it. I let the roses grow. All those spikies did a really nice job of helping promote them. I've leaned into that design or that information from the landscape and mimicked it a bit. So for example, here is an Asian pear, a little bit more precious. It's a grafted nice tree, and I planted the weeds around it. I put in horseradish, some nice aromatic leaves. I put in some black currant cuttings. I mimicked the shrub layer, the herbaceous, weedy layer that normally flanks these trees. If I do no intervention, I added them in this case. So we'll get black currants, we can maybe get some horseradish while this Asian pear does its thing. Now in this case, because it was right on the edge of a pathway, I put a ring around it. And again, I'm not pushing this idea everything has to be wild and feral, but just trying to ascribe more value to it than simply, oh, you let your garden go, it's too weedy. Maybe it's a very intentional thing that can actually benefit all the plants and save you a lot of time. Here's another little scene where I do the absolute minimal management as far as pruning. So for example, here is a European pear. I did put a ring around this one because this is one I paid for. A lot of times when I grow plants from seed or they're excess for the nursery, I just plant them in and let the weeds grow. The ones I buy, I tend to drop a little ring around. Here are some plums I grew from seed. Now they get some deer browse, but I can tolerate that because I know they can tolerate that, and over time they'll grow through it. You can see I've cut down some things around here just to see what's going on, but very intentionally have left the black-cap raspberries to weave through. So now are these arching canes locking in as they tip layer, making spikes all around this plum. And this one had more black caps. I think it got less browse, and so it's a taller tree. In this crazy glade, I had some black locust trees that I planted about 10 years ago that I've since pollarded, cut them when they were dormant at about chest height, and let the resprouts grow. These are all new shoots from these black locust. And the year that I did that pollarding, where there was a nice light release to the north of them, I put in some American plums. 1, 2, 3. They're all in competition now. The plum is pushing hard to get up into the canopy. The locust is also growing very fast. Lots of spikes on the locust, lots of deflection and complexity. The plums are now above deer browse, and the competition between these two is healthy. I can cut the locust as needed to feed the plums, and because there's black currants all around, there's all sorts of spiky wild stuff happening all around. New shoots from the plums have a chance to come up into the canopy as well. In the long term, I anticipate this thicket becoming a whole suckering spread of wild American plums as we harvest black locust for material to build with, for firewood, and for nutrient-rich mulch to put around these trees. There are examples like this over and over and over again in our landscape, but more importantly, examples like this everywhere around you in the wild spaces. Those areas where apple trees and oaks have just barely squeezed through deer browse. A lot of times, if you look closely, you realize, oh, there was a thicket of spiky plants around those. Maybe that helped them. And so you've got this opportunity as you plant, as you design, to think about what it looks like to let these trees, these shrubs get a little bit feral, a little bit weedy, observe and interact. Don't necessarily cut everything down just because your main plant is there, but instead observe and interact and support them by letting it be a little wild and feral, mutually supportive, and see what happens. I did my one pass with the mower, just enough to see that yes, all the hazelnuts and persimmons are fine. That's about it. Am I gonna weed around there or mulch? Nope, there's other things to do. Those plants will probably do just fine. They're also planted so darn close that if 50% of them get browsed to death, we'll still have enough persimmons and hazelnuts to get a crop. So, long story short, there's a pile of weeds with some trees I care about in the middle, and it works. Thanks for watching.